Hi everyone, welcome to my talk. Thank you for joining. I'll talk today about social groups and the problem of persistence through change. The question I want to address is through what changes, if any, do social groups persist? This is a huge metaphysical problem, and to start, I will narrow down my focus by restricting the range of examples to the set of organized social groups. How we solve the problem of persistence of organized social groups depends a lot on how we conceptualize such entities. And in this talk, I'll take social groups to be structured wholes and consider what structure-based metaphysics has to say about persistence. Unlike extensional mereology, structure-based mereology or metaphysics takes groups to be objects composed of organized matter, meaning that both the matter and the structure of the group are to be included among the identity conditions of the group. And because matter and structure are relevant for group identity, synchronic identity in this case, I will consider how the account deals with changes in membership and structure when it comes to group identity over time. Something I should have said at the beginning is that by identity here, I mean numerical identity. So my question is, on this view on structure-based metaphysics, through what changes in membership and structure do organized social groups persist? My answer is that there's no general answer. I will argue that the issue of group persistence requires a case-by-case explanation attentive to both members and structure, and that also considers the metaphysical grounds of the social structure realized by the group. My point is that a metaphysics of social groups that, in accounting for persistence, only considers membership and structure is not enough, is of limited scope. The analysis could be more informative if, together with the structure, we provide a metaphysical explanation of how the structure of the group is socially constructed. And among the forms of social construction, I will focus on grounding relations. I know this is not the whole story about social construction, but this is my first step in this investigation. And speaking of steps, I will first outline the theoretical framework of structure-based metaphysics, and then I'll discuss the case of group persistence through change in membership and structure. In this phase, I'll discuss some specific examples. Then I'll provide some generalizations and concluding remarks. So let's start with a brief introduction to structure-based metaphysics. This is an approach to social objects that regards organized social groups as structured or unified wholes, that is, composite material particulars constituted by individuals standing in relations through time. As said, on this view, the identity of social groups relies in the members and the way they are organized. The organization of the members is what I call the structure or shape of the group, which is a network of relations that makes available positions or nodes to be occupied by entities. What entities may serve as node occupiers is fixed by the relations, as they constrain the number, the type, and the properties of the occupier. Structural relations also fix the function of each node within the structure. And together with this, they also fix the function of the entire structure. So, in the case of organized social groups, examples of structures are patterns of relation fixing the player's role in a football team, just to mention some recent event, and kinship ties in a family, and the system of offices within an institution. So this is the framework. Now, what about identity over time? Here is a quote from Kozlicki. Although this is not about social groups, but about structured wholes in general, we can easily apply it to the case of groups. I read the quote. Unlike neurological sums, not only are these objects quite obviously capable of surviving changes with respect to their parts, while neurological sums like sets have their parts essentially. But in contrast to the completely unstructured nature of neurological sums, the existence and identity of these objects is also evidently tied to the arrangement or configuration of their parts. This passage emphasizes two important steps for analysis. The first one is that structured wholes are quite obviously capable of surviving changes with respect to their parts. So my question is it always the case that groups survive membership changes? This question is prompted by the fact that even if it is true that, generally speaking, most of the time, organized social groups have replaceable members, sometimes certain members seem to be necessary for the identity of the group. And I want to clarify how structure-based metaphysics would deal with such cases. The second important remark is that the identity over time of these objects is evidently tied to the arrangement or configuration of their parts. This seems to imply that continuity of structure is necessary for group persistence. But once again, everyday life provides examples of groups changing their structure while being considered still the same group. An example is provided by all those companies and institutions that during the pandemic have changed the organization of the activities by shifting from in-presence to online work. Another pandemic-inspired case is that of some fashion houses that have converted their production or part of it from clothes to face masks. And since these cases are quite common, even in ordinary circumstances, I wanted to ask whether for structure-based metaphysics, persistence can ever occur in the case of structural changes. Now, let's start with the first question. For structure-based metaphysics, is it always the case that group survives membership changes? Consider this example. This is a photo, unfortunately, not one of mine, of the band Florence and the Machine. The original composition of the group included vocalist Florence Welch, keyboardist Isabel Summers, guitarist Rob Akerd, harpist Tom Monger, and drummer Christopher Hayden. Now, consider this event, true story. In 2018, drummer Christopher Hayden left the band and new collaboration were started. Well, according to structure-based metaphysics, the group can be held the same before and after the change because the structure of the group has remained the same even though a member has been replaced. Now, consider this event, the event in which the person leaving the group were Florence. In this fictional scenario, the vocalist leaves the group, and even though the structure of the group does not change because the singer is replaced, our intuition rises its suspects on the persistence of the group. As a matter of fact, Florence seems to be necessary for the identity of the group. And I think this is not just because the name Florence is part of the label. This is a tricky example, but no matter if this description works for this specific case, the point I want to make is that there is something in structure-based metaphysics that allows us to treat the cases like this one and distinguish between contexts where identity over time is indifferent to changes in membership and cases where these changes are instead relevant. Indeed, as mentioned already, structural relations fix the number, type, and properties of the node occupiers. This means that, and I quote from Ricci, as a limiting case, a node might require that it be occupied by a particular person. So, even though in structure-based metaphysics, members may be replaced and the group persists, There are cases in which the structure constrains the non-occupiers. And this is something we need to consider on a case-by-case scale. For those cases in which we have such a constraint, some continuity in membership is a necessary condition for group persistence. Therefore, structure-based metaphysics is not blind to eventual membership rigidity. And this is my answer to the first question. Now, consider the second. Can persistence ever occur in the face of structural changes? This is a difficult one because it seems to be an assumption of the account that structural continuity be necessary for group persistence. And here is a very explicit quote: for a group to survive is for its parts to continue to be organized in the relevant object-making fashion, even when those parts may be subject to replacement through time. What we have here mentioned is interchangeability of the members, and we said it is not always the case, and continuity of the way in which the group is organized, more specifically of the relevant object-making fashion. But is this relevant object-making fashion something rigid, or is there any margin for flexibility? Well, to approach such a theoretical matter, I suggest we consider an example, actually a pretty common one. This is a committee. And imagine this is a jury of a dance competition. At time t, the group has 5 members organized in such a way that decisions about candidates are made by majority voting. Then at time t prime, the group has the same 5 members, but shifted its voting system from simple majority to unanimity. Can we say that the group is the same before and after the change? Well, if we were to interpret structure-based metaphysics as an account that ties the identity over time of groups to unchanging structures, then the group could not be considered the same before and after the change. However, I will argue that the structuralist view has the tools to explain persistence also in the case of specific structural changes. And to provide such an explanation, considerations are needed about the metaphysics of the group, of course, and more specifically about the metaphysics of social structures. So let's take a step back and consider the way we characterized, organized the social groups at the outset as structured wholes. As social entities, groups have a structure that is socially constructed. That is, the structure is the product of social factors, such as practices, conventions, and institutions. Social structures might depend on social factors in 2 ways, causally and non-causally. Although causal dependence might offer relevant explanations of persistence, I want to focus here on non-causal dependence exclusively and see whether there is something in the metaphysics of groups that marks some range of flexibility for structural variation at the grounding level. So, here you find a quote from Ricci. This is Ricci's definition of constitutive or non-causal dependence, and it keeps together in a disjunction both the theoretical and the metaphysical forms of non-causal construction. I read the quote. Structure S constitutively depends on social factors, just in case in defining what it is to be S, reference must be made to some social factors, or social factors are metaphysically necessary for S to exist, or social factors ground the existence of S, or the fact that S exists. I will consider especially the third line of the disjunction, so grounding relations. And the point I wanted to make is that if it is true that social structures are metaphysically dependent on social factors, then it may be that what social structures are, the way they appear, the way they are shaped, is not necessarily rigid, but may have margins of flexibility consistent with their nature or consistent with their being structures grounded on some specific social factors. To put it differently, well, if it is true that by virtue of certain social factors, groups have the social structure that they have, there may be cases where certain structural variations are equally compatible with the set of social factors that ground the structure. Well, consider the dense competition jury again. To keep it simple, assume that the regulation is the only social factor that stands in a grounding relation to the group structure. It is a full, formalized, unchanging ground, the simplest case possible. Remember, we said that the group changed its structure from majority to unanimity voting. Then the problem was about whether the group is numerically the same before and after the change. Considering only members and structure, it seemed not. Now, I want to re-examine the whole thing by including grounds in our considerations. Now, identifying the regulation as the ground, the full ground in this case, allows us to provide an explanation that distinguishes between expected and unexpected changes. The former are changes somehow encoded in the grounds. The latter are changes for which grounding social factors are not prepared, let's say. In our example, expected is what is regulated by the regulation, the charter. Unexpected is what is not regulated by the charter. Among regulated changes, some may be allowed and some may not. Allowed would be, for example, changing the decision-making procedure whenever the regulation provides for this possibility. Not allowed would be changes that are explicitly precluded by the regulation. But if the regulation did not specify anything about the decision-making procedure, an eventual change of that mechanism would be unexpected. Such a change would be an alteration if the change were consistent with all other structural features specified by the grounds. Whereas it would be a contradiction if, in the numerical identity of the group, of course, if this unexpected change were contradictory to some structural features set by the regulations, set by the grounds. So this is the main idea. And this is a graph that illustrates the changes we have been discussing so far. The graph shows how structure-based metaphysics would answer the two questions I was asking at the beginning. The first one was, is it always the case that groups survive membership changes? And the answer is no, because sometimes the nodes are restricted by some structural constraint. And for this reason, it is not true that the members can change without any restriction, that the changes in the membership are irrelevant for persistence. For persistence, this is not true. Second question, can persistence ever occur in the face of structural changes? What I've argued is that persistence can occur whenever the structural change falls within the possibilities provided at the level of the grounds. Whenever the structural change falls within the margins of flexibility provided at the level of the grounds. Therefore, structure-based metaphysics may include margins of structural flexibility. And this is what the way I answered this second question. And you know, these margins of flexibility could be refined by causal explanations. But as I said, this part is yet to come. So this is basically my conclusion, but I can add a couple of things. So I have argued that membership and structure are not sufficient to account for persistence. We need an explanation that also includes an account of how the structure of the group is constructed, and especially how it is grounded on social factors. This kind of explanation requires a case-by-case analysis, which is a complex one. And well, my talk was just a work in progress, so the complexity of the analysis is still to be covered, of course. Well, that's it. Thank you for your attention.